Welcome back to Goodreads. I'm your host, Jim Hall. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really excited to have a great author on. I've had the privilege of talking with Mark before, and today we have Mark Terry on. And Mark's going to tell us about Explorers and so many other, at least 15 other books he's written. But let's jump right into it. Mark, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Glad to be here. Good to see you.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I'm always excited when you have a new book out. And you ventured into something different for me and what I've read with you, into sci-fi. And we're both sci-fi fans, and you knocked this one out of the park.
Well, thank you.
Why don't you, as you know, I hate to say too much about books, then I get talking and give away the first 4 chapters. So let's go. I will say the start is after the first 10 pages, you're right into it. A failed space mission then leads to basically the premise of this book. An astronaut really searching for her brother, who she thinks is dead. She learns later that maybe not. So let's go from
Right. So the overall premise of this book, from a high level, is the first faster than light ship on Earth. So 150 years in the future, we're pretty much doing stuff out in the solar system. Begins with the first human test flight. Mike Winston's the pilot. His sister Jen Winston is also a test pilot and an engineer, but she's working mission control. They've had lots of experimental tests. They take it out. This is the beginning of the book. He disappears. They don't know what happened. So cut 10 years later, this very young math genius comes up and catches her at a space station when she's coming back from a piloting trip from Mars and says, I figured it out. I know what happened, and I think we can find him. And I'm building a ship, and I want you to be the executive officer on that ship. So we go from there to, okay, they get the crew, they build the ship, they do some testing, and then they go out on their mission. And it was sort of intended to be, if you're into sci-fi, it was going to be a little bit of a Star Trek thing. I wanted to write about this first faster than light thing. Then it turned into, if you're into Star Trek TV shows or things, I would say Babylon 5 is probably a bigger influence here. Not quite what I intended, but it was like once they get out there, they started encountering aliens. It's not all smooth sailing. It would be the one that there's a lot of adventure. As is often the case, most of my books fall into the thriller category, or maybe even political thriller, and I sort of amused myself when I was like, I've written 2 science fiction books so far, and they're still in a way political thrillers and adventures for sure. And I guess that's where I keep coming back to.
We had a discussion off camera that I recommended the book to someone, and that they really enjoyed it. They normally didn't read sci-fi, but they said that you made science fiction very approachable, understandable. Too much. There's plenty of science in here, but there's science that you can digest and not have to be at this level of engineering to get it.
And I know both you and I are fans of the books of John Scalzi, for instance. One of the great things about him is how accessible he is. He's telling a story, and there's science, and there's big ideas, right? I know that science fiction really likes the concept of the big idea, and I think they're there. But I really want to entertain people. I want anybody to be able to pick it up and go, okay, it's a fun, fast read, it's enjoyable, there's interesting characters doing fun things, and hopefully there'll be a couple things in there that'll go, hey, I hadn't really thought of that before too. But entertaining is the key, and that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Now, again, you and I have had the pleasure of talking in the past, and I've interviewed you 4 or 5 times now over the years, and I know you for the thrillers and the political thrillers and all that. So as a sci-fi fan, I was so excited for you to write this, and it kind of piggybacks into a previous book that you wrote that is also in the sci-fi genre. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, A Plague of Stars. I almost, and it's not really intended, I was a little worried about having plague in it because it got published toward the end of the COVID pandemic, and in some ways it was my COVID book. I'd started it years before, didn't do much with it, and then things, as we know, kind of ground to a halt. And my day job, if you will, is as a science medical writer. So I was plenty busy writing during that. But I turned to writing The Plague of Stars. And A Plague of Stars is in the same universe. And it's maybe 100, 150 years later. Earth is out there. There's a galactic union. And this very well-known organization called Doctors Without Borders is still out there, and it involves a physician who's headed to a war zone on a planet, and his ship gets shot down, and it's basically him, a captain, and an Engalian, who is the navigator on the ship, are captured, and they become kind of political pawns in this war, particularly where the Engalian, which is one of the species that also appears in Explorers, is I will say a little bit pixie-like or elf-like, and in that book she becomes. They think that she might be a prophet, and meanwhile they want to use the main characters, the other two characters, as guinea pigs for their scientific experiments, and so there's a whole lot of. Again, I couldn't quite get away from the political adventures, and I always thought that one was a little bit of a man who could be king in space kind of concept, but. And partly, when I wrote Plague of Stars and I was deciding what am I going to do next, and it's like, do you want to write in this universe? And I thought, I'd really like to see how this started. I want to go back to how did the Galactic Union start? I had brought up a couple issues involving the quantum space, how this isn't a warp drive, it actually drops into quantum space, and where time and distance doesn't mean very much. And I wanted to, and when people are exposed to it, like they share dreams, and how does that come out? And when people discover that, that's really freaky. And if you're possibly sharing that with different species, alien species, how weird that would be. So that's a component of that kind of started me going, let's look at Explorers. Let's see how this started.
Okay, now fantastic. So this is a great book. This is a great book, and like I say, we knew each other from all your thrillers and political intrigue, but you've gotten this now. We've got the beginning of the universe and kind of a book that takes place in the universe. More to follow?
I'm actually working on 2 books. The main project right now is a police procedural, sort of a serial killer book that takes place in Arizona. But I went back and I really wanted to pick up after Explorers, and I wanted to really only like 2 months after the ending of that book, where they're like, okay, we want to go back, and there's a lot of the UN, for instance, has other ideas, and it also involves like at this point a potential murder mystery involved on the space station. Fantastic. Where this alliance of aliens is. So that's just started. I'm tinkering with that.
Excellent. Well, I'll certainly be excited to read more, and I'm sure our folks at home will also be excited to read more of that. Now, every time we get together, I bang the drum for one of my favorite characters I absolutely love to read, Derek Stillwater. You've written about 8 or 9 now, and just absolutely wonderful. And Mark and I met many, many years ago when he was doing one of these books, and I've read every one except a novella that I couldn't get on because I told you it was on Kindle. So let's talk. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about this because people who love thrillers and action adventure and political intrigue, all of it's in there. But one of the real great things is that, especially in the early ones, at least a lot of the stories start in Michigan, or a good component takes place in Michigan. But it's high-level intrigue, and it's. I am just waiting for somebody that's smart in Hollywood to pick this up and either turn it into a TV show or a movie or a series of movies, because Derek Stillwater is just this incredible character that you've woven these wonderful stories through the years.
Yeah,
tell the folks at home about that.
So Derek is a terrorism expert. Specifically, his expertise is in biological and chemical terrorism. The first books really deal with that. The first book being The Devil's Pitchfork. The one that takes place mostly in Detroit is The Serpent's Kiss. And then I've written 8 or 10 novels featuring Derek, or some novellas, which the book you held there, Stillwater 3, was I had written 3 novellas, and 2 of them weren't out in paper. And I thought, let's put them out. Let's get them out there. And those are, in terms of equivalence, the Jack Bauer from the 24 series back in the day, and even there's a little James Bond aspect to it, I think. Very action thriller, but he's, I don't want to scare anybody off and say he's cerebral, but he is, I always described him as the guy who does what needs to be done, and if something's going on, and so over the course of that series, he's evolved from working in the Department of Homeland Security, then he was on loan to the State Department, and toward the end, he had formed a kind of a security company with a former Secretary of Homeland Security. And I suspect I will get back to him. The third novella in the Stillwater 3 is called The Wuhan Affair, and part of that was, again, during the or at least toward the end of the pandemic. I thought, he's an expert on biological warfare and terrorism. What's he doing? And in that one, he was sent to Wuhan during the middle of the pandemic to find a scientist that might have some clues.
Timely, right.
Yeah, and I'd like to get back with him. I've been foiled a little bit with some attempts with current events, I guess. I was writing one that was really starting out in Ukraine, and then Russia invaded Ukraine, and I was like, okay, might want to rethink that. And now I'm wondering, because his lover in the last couple books is a Mossad agent. They have a long distance relationship, and I thought, oh, okay, but I might want to wait a little bit to figure out how things are going to resolve there before I write a story there. But he's still on my mind.
Now, Mark, I'd be remiss if I didn't let people know that you've done some standalones and some other stuff. You've got a vast collection and easily attainable through, because everything is available digitally now. Mm-hmm. And so talk a little bit about some of the other books out there you'd like people to read.
I've written, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that Explorers is my 30th book.
Wow.
30th novel, which probably makes me Michigan's most prolific unknown author. Mm-hmm. So like 8 or 10 of them are Derek Stillwater thrillers. I've got the 2 science fiction. I have one that's actually one of my favorites. It's called Crystal Storm, which is a tech thriller that takes place in Antarctica.
Very enjoyable book.
That's one I'd like to get back to that character, and really enjoyed writing that. I have a couple kind of political thrillers that were a character named Austin Davis, who is a political fixer, basically, in Washington, D.C. I always thought of him as treat him like a private investigator, only his clients are all congressmen and senators that would like things covered up, mostly. And then I wrote some stuff with my son, Ian, who's a professional writer himself. He's working as a technical writer these days. We did some stuff together, kind of targeting kids. One was like a series of short novellas linked together called Zombie Wars. And I wrote some stuff for kids, and then aside from all that, I've done ghostwriting, both fiction and nonfiction, so like another 10 books or so. And at least one straight out espionage one, China Fire. So I try to, I'd say they all have the same elements of action and perhaps politics. Action, adventure, intrigue, suspense, that's pretty much my bread and butter there.
Now, when we're off camera, we'll have conversations quite a bit after the different interviews we've done over the years, and I'll see you out and about, and we talk, have a great relationship. And I know you outside of the interview process, and I know that you're, before I say, well, I know you're a fan of sci-fi, when are you going to try sci-fi? Well, I think you do great, and you have. I know you're a fan of horror. Have you thought about, and we've talked about Stephen King books that we both like or both dislike, and some other authors and stuff. I'm curious if you've ever thought about that genre, or do you think it's
Just
too
a
watered
little
down?
bit, and that's what I just finished giving my son feedback on his most recent manuscript, which is a flat-out horror novel. And I keep thinking that might be a genre. I have a couple ideas. And I keep thinking that maybe it would be fun to write with Ian again. We'll see, we're both pretty busy, and we both have our ideas. And sometimes working together on the fiction wasn't always, we had very different ideas. And it was fun, but it was a different process, I think, for both of us. So maybe.
Can I ask you something? Now, normally for this show, people like to know about the process, and that's not something we've talked about a lot in the past. And so since you just brought that's a different process, working with your son or working with a second author, can you talk a little bit about your process and how the building of a novel happens for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually sort of, partly because I'm a nonfiction writer for a living, freelance writer, always available for work of a broad range, but usually I work in healthcare and medicine and biopharma. So I've kind of trained myself to not have to do draft after draft after draft. So it kind of comes down to think more, write less, is one of my mantras. So I try to think about what is going to go and then try to do a pretty good first draft. If I need to go back and clean things up or change plot lines, I do. So that when I am done with that first draft, it may take a little while, but I don't usually have to do tons and tons and tons of rewrites. That's how I used to do things when I was beginning, and I would write 8, 9, 10 drafts, and what a tiring process. So it's definitely been, for me, better to think more and write less, try to get it better, try to get it right the first time. The downside of that is and my son's in this position that, and I think a lot of writers are, being slower and deliberate the first time around saves you a lot of work on the back end, but it's not quite as much fun to write the first time. If you just sit there and I'm going to blast through this manuscript, it's great. It's like reading your favorite story and being caught up in the story. The problem is that you have to do a lot of work to clean that up, and I had just found that, like, I don't know if I want to go back and do it that way. Sometimes it'd be fun to just sit there and crank through it, and I'm going to crank out 10, 20 pages a day and get lost in the story, but boy, that creates a lot of work on the back end.
Now, of interest to me then, so because you have the full-time writing position, you're doing stuff, if you've got a great idea and you're going to, all right, I'm starting now to, what's a page number or a page count that you like to try to knock out in a day or a week?
Well, back in the day, it used to be 5 pages a day. Now it feels like if I can get one good page, I'm pretty happy. And sort of that's the challenge now, to go do the one page. If things are going well, it might turn into 2, 3, 4, or 5. If it doesn't, you go, there's the one page. Okay, we'll come back to that tomorrow. And I know that for a lot of people, like, I never understood, and in some ways still don't, for full-time writers, if they're taking years and years and years to write a book, why? My example of this is William Styron, who wrote Sophie's Choice. Granted, it's a masterpiece, but he took like 24 years to write it. I'm sure the clinical depression slowed him down a lot, but was he writing a sentence a day? I mean, but then again, I mean, it's really comparing apples to oranges when you're looking at a book like that with something that's more of an entertainment. So I think I can write pretty fast. I type fast. That's a convenient skill for a freelance writer, to be able to type fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah, secret of my success. And to try to think it through. I mean, I'm probably thinking about the books consciously or unconsciously all the time anyways. And it's a classic approach to, I have a story problem before you go to bed. Let's see if I can figure this out as I'm going to sleep. And a lot of times the next morning it'll be like, that's what I should have done.
And I haven't asked you that question a lot in the past, but people who watch this show, kind of like, you know, have written me and said, I'd like to know a little bit more about the prior, ask this person about that. So I'd like to ask that. And it is, the more that I do that, it's interesting to me because some folks we've both read or maybe not have read. I question why some authors suddenly stop Patrick Rothfuss, why can you write 2 great books and then if you just wrote a page a day? And again, that's just a question that goes through my head. And there's a million things. I don't want to open up a Pandora's box.
When that comes to, and I don't know his situation.
George R. Martin, you know, things of that.
Finish it, George. Yeah, finish Game of Thrones. Everybody wants you to finish it. I don't think he had an idea how to finish it. I think that's part of his issue. He just wants to keep writing it forever.
Keep writing stories.
Yeah. I think self-doubt becomes it can be a real killer. And I suspect part of it for me, I'm always hearing writers talk about, oh, well, writing a novel, it's some of the hardest work you can do. No. Okay. Doing it well, yes. That it's a job, it's difficult, it's a lot of work, it can be really, really tedious. But on the other hand, I've done jobs like wash dishes and like, don't kid yourself, those are harder jobs. The hard part about writing fiction is just knowing if it's any good. It's really hard as an author to, while you're writing, to go, yeah, this is great. This is really great. And then you read it later and go, no, it really wasn't. And then sometimes it's the reverse. That's happened with a couple of my novels where I kind of abandoned them. And then the idea still stuck in my head, and I would go back and look at it and go, oh, this is really pretty good. I'm really interested in this. I should keep writing it. You know, A Plague of Stars basically fell into that category. Definitely a book I wrote about a computer hacker was a case where I just threw up my hands and said, I'm never going to write it. And then a couple of years later, I was like, pull it up on the computer and went, oh, this could work. I just need to get past this part, you know.
So maybe a little tweak here, a little tweak.
Yeah, sometimes sometimes you just start back and you go, I don't know what my problem was. We're not machines. We have lives. It's possible that there are things that go on in your lives, and you just say, okay, I can't deal with this topic now. Or sometimes I'm no longer a young writer, right? But there are things that I know there were some ideas where I would try them, and this was before I had kids, and I was writing about things, and I was like, I'm not equipped to write this idea. So I think a lot of novelists get into the idea of, I have a great idea. Maybe it's not a great idea for you to write. You know, I've had some ideas where it's like, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, that would be a killer for me. That would be a really difficult project. Because every now and then I thought, oh, I'd be interested in doing like alternate history kind of thing. Oh, those are so research intensive. I don't know if I could do something like that. Just because I have a good idea doesn't mean it's good for me.
Yeah, that would definitely. I've enjoyed a few of those and a few writers, but yeah, if you're going to get your facts right and stuff, I could see where that would be a challenge. We've talked about a lot, so before we run out of time, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know, because we've talked about a lot of books, and people are probably saying, let this guy tell me how I can read more of his stuff. You've got a great, very user-friendly website that people can go see, descriptions of the books, or just talk a little bit about the website.
Yeah, the website is www.markterrybooks.com, and it's got all the books there. We've, at this point, kind of streamlined it to, I think they're all just Amazon links, but the books are all available through Barnes & Noble. They should be available. I mean, they probably aren't necessarily on the shelves of the book, but if you go in, you can order. Any bookstore has access to almost all of these books. So, I mean, if people want them, they can. It might take a tiny bit of effort to walk into your local bookstore, but certainly they're all available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Right. But we encourage, support your local bookshop. Like Mark said, you go to any bookshop, say, I really like this author, I'd like to do this. They'll find the book for you. Before we close it out, I want to, because you did come to talk about Explorers today, look into the camera and give the folks a minute and a half, 2 minute, 30-second spiel on why they should be buying Explorers.
Okay, well, Explorers. I think one reason simply is that I think it's a fun read. I think that it's got a lot of action adventure, hopefully engaging characters. And I have to say, some of those characters are not human. One of my favorite characters in the entire book is actually Carlo, who is a alien that is, he's an engineer, and I should say that he's a giant spider. Actually, the Shilonk have they look like tarantulas that are about the size of a Labrador retriever. And generally they're known for being quite easy to get along with if you can get past the fact that they are spiders the size of a Labrador retriever. And I enjoy his character. I think he's funny. I think that his interactions with one of the other characters, Cypress, I just loved writing. It was so much fun. And I'm hoping that the fun I had writing it would translate to the readers who will say, yeah, even if science fiction's not really your thing, you know, you might find that this is fun, and if science fiction is your thing, I think you'll like it.
Absolutely. Mark, I love having you on. I love when we can get together and talk. I love talking about your books, other books. We have great discussions. But again, you've knocked it out of the park with this. I expressed the story about sharing the book with somebody that I was just trying to say, hey, give it a try, and they loved it. I think you have a great strength of writing. Derek Stillwater is so believable. I can see him in my head. He's not Superman. He's not your characters are very accessible, people we've all known or met or hung out with, and I think that's a real strength. I think I've compared to like Stephen King. When he writes, you start knowing these people. They were somebody you used to date or used to. That's how I find a lot of the characters you write. So I want to wish you continued success. And again, I thank you so much for being on the show today.
Glad to be here.
Folks, I can't say enough about Mark Terry. You've heard me say how much I enjoy his works. Go to your favorite bookstore, go online, get Explorers, and dive into this new universe you can learn about. But do yourself a favor and learn about Derek Stillwater. And if you go to his website, there's nice little synopsis of the different stories and the different books and stuff. See which one you think might interest you. And then when you enjoy it, you're going to have a whole world. I think there's at least 10 of his novels and novellas out there. So really, I implore you to give his works a try. So again, I thank you so much for watching today, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.